Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now what we have here is an AMD RX 5700. Back in 2019 it offered excellent performance for the $350 price tag, and at $50 less than its XT counterpart on paper anyway, it was the slightly more budget conscious choice. I bought one of these 8GB RDNA GPUs when they were fairly new and actually ended up flashing the XT BIOS onto it as a little experiment. Being a reference model, my experiment didn't last long as the heat and noise became a bit too concerning for me. I ended up flashing it back, but it ended up being persistent driver issues that made me sell it. 4 years on, I've bought another and I couldn't be happier. I paid just £115 for this HP model, pulled straight from an Omen gaming PC. It's worth pointing out that in some regions, 5700s and 5700 XTs are so close in price that you may as well just buy the latter, if slightly higher power consumption doesn't bother you, but here in the UK, I've seen some truly irresistible bargains on the non-XT card. Think similar to RX 6600 performance on a tighter budget, albeit with less efficiency and lack of ray tracing capabilities. In some games we will need the help of FSR to hit close to or exceed 60 FPS with higher than low settings, but most of the time 1080p native was doable, with a nice balance of visual quality options. Let's start however with the titles that gave this card the hardest time. The first is of course Cyberpunk 2077. Sure, I could have lowered everything, but I felt that enabling FSR quality mode was a tiny price to pay to retain a mix of medium and high settings. Crowd density and textures were those settings that I set to high, whereas the preset option itself was at medium. FSR 2.1 ensured that the overall clarity wasn't really affected, at least not in my opinion, though it bumped our frame rate up to beyond 70 FPS. There were a few dips and drops below 60, which occurred in NPC heavy areas, so I think my CPU is more to blame here. A solid experience all round though. The next game is the newly released Starfield, and this did better than I thought. The 5700 is the other minimum spec GPU for this game, but instead of low I went for the medium preset with dynamic resolution on, 62% render scale and FSR2 enabled. Here in Aquila City, a pretty demanding area of the game, the performance was holding up fairly well on the 5700. Not quite 60 FPS, but this was a more than acceptable experience in my opinion, given how it's performed on some of my other hardware. Targeting at least 60 isn't impossible, dropping everything to the lowest settings would help, but it still won't be consistent, so I thought that we may as well enjoy slightly better visuals with a frame rate that mostly sits at above 50. Those were the only two games where I felt upscaling was actually necessary, at least for the settings that I wanted to use. Utilising lower quality visual options or just targeting a lower frame rate would mean that 1080p native is still more than achievable with this card, and 1440p is going to be doable in some instances as well. Next we have Elden Ring, which is capped at 60 FPS by default. I went with a high preset here, only turning off motion blur and depth of field, as I do in every game simply as a personal preference. At high, the game looks fantastic and sticks to the FPS limit pretty much all of the time. According to the percentile lows, there will be the occasional drop, but Elden Ring felt consistent to play over the course of my 20-minute test. With online competitive games like Fortnite, a higher frame rate is more important than visual quality settings in my opinion, but I still like to utilise higher presets in test videos just to show you what different cards are capable of. Sometimes we can enjoy high frame rates and high graphical settings, and that is the case here with Fortnite hitting close to 120 FPS. As I said, medium or low would be better, but if you have a 60 or 75Hz 1080p monitor, then the 5700 will be more than enough for you. In Forza Horizon 5 I went with Ultra. TAA was also enabled. I did think that perhaps I was pushing things a bit too much on a card that cost me less than £120, excluding postage, but the 5700 had no problem pumping out at least 60 FPS with decent percentile lows. In fact, all of the performance numbers stuck to above 60, with 83 being the average, 70 being the 1% low, and 68 coming in as that 0.1% figure. Hogwarts Legacy is up next, and this can give some older cards issues, though in my experience it's older Nvidia cards that suffer more, at least in terms of consistency. That's generally what I've discovered after testing plenty of aging GPUs. With the AMD 5700, our frame time graph was still a little all over the place, but the percentile lows of 52 and 36, along with the 78 FPS average, meant that this game was playable and enjoyable with the high preset, and TAA set to low. We didn't need any help from FSR upscaling here today. With Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, I opted for the high preset with TAA, again with any upscaling turned off. With this one, the frame rate hit 100 FPS on average, and the only reason I didn't turn things up to Ultra was because it doesn't really look any different, yet it still affects the performance. The 5700 provided a really nice experience here, albeit with a few dips and drops. Red Dead Redemption 2 now, and this time I went with the Ultra textures, with everything else apart from TAA set to high. Any on-off toggles in the settings were set to off, and TAA was set to medium. This gave us at least 80 FPS with the 5700, and I do believe it's capable of more, i.e. a higher resolution, not just here, but in other titles too. I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest, when I bought this card again in 2023, so I think I ended up being a little overcautious with the settings I chose. I do still think it's best suited to a 1080p gaming rig, but that is of course a recommendation and not a sweeping statement. There will be games when you can turn the settings and resolutions up a lot higher. Finally then we have The Witcher 3, the next gen version, which I set to the Ultra Plus preset. Now these settings make the game look great, though SSR or screen space reflections were set to low, as this option can destroy frame rates. The same with Hairworks really. I left this off because turning it on, sure it makes people's hair look a bit better, but it absolutely destroys performance. TAAU was enabled here as the anti-aliasing method, and during my little run around the busy city and its outskirts, performance held up really well with over 90 FPS on the 5700. The percentile low stayed above 60 here as well, and it was a fairly smooth experience for this game. Overall, the 5700 is a great card for the money, if it costs quite a bit less than the 5700 XT where you live, and significantly less than an RX 6600. Here, it falls into that description nicely, but in other regions, things may differ. Furthermore, it's usually reference blower style cards that will cost the least, and they are of course noisier, though I found that my headphones blocked out most of the noise from this one. I was fairly happy with the noise and the thermals of this 5700, ripped straight from someone's HP Omen gaming machine. All in all, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know your thoughts on the RX 5700 in 2023. Would you buy one of these? Why? Would you not buy one of these? Again, let me know why. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.